Okay, so it is 1 minute to 11. I am just going to wait another couple of moments. I'm also just going to open up the Q&A window so that if anybody has any questions, they can pop them into the Q&A window. I will try and answer some of those questions. Fiona may well also try and answer some of those questions for you. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to open up the mic as we progress through this, so that people can ask their questions and we can give some really meaningful answers. We've got about 50 people booked on for today's webinar, which I have to say thank you so much to everybody for putting your confidence in us. I only decided to do this webinar quite late last night. I think the invite went out at about 10 o'clock. And as I said, we've got about 50 people booked on to join us, so thank you. I guess the main thing to say before I start is that the official advice is changing daily and almost by the hour. So when I run our webinars normally, our normal monthly webinars, I often have lots of slides and I'm sharing those slides with you. That's not practical today. And the reason for that is even between last night and this morning, some of the information is changing. So those slides were going to be out of date before I even started. What we are doing is recording this. So you will have an opportunity, I'll get it online as quickly as I possibly can today, but you will have an opportunity to listen back or to watch back on this session. Also, if anybody has any questions, they can either drop them into the Q&A box or they can email us in afterwards. The email address for that is support@dohr.co.uk. We've got a whole load of retained clients who will get that support automatically. But if anybody else needs support, then it is available and we can talk to you about how you access that. I'm going to crack on because I've got a lot to get through today. I'm going to mainly talk about the people within your business, but I'm also going to touch on payroll and finance, insurance and communication. So finance, insurance and in effect marketing. And I'm going to touch on those things where they overlap quite strongly with the people aspects of your business. So where to start? Well, I guess the main message that we took from Boris Johnson's press conference yesterday is where possible and practical to do so, all employees should now be working from home. Now that's relatively fine for organisations where people are office-based. However, that's much, much harder for shops, for emergency workers, security guards, cleaners, teachers, and that sort of frontline staff who aren't office-based. So let me talk about firstly the office-based staff, and then I'll move on to the frontline staff. I'm also just going to put my phone on Don't Disturb so it doesn't ring while we're talking. If people have laptops and have the ability to work from home, you should now take all reasonable steps to enable them to do so. We were told yesterday that social distancing is appropriate and that people shouldn't be travelling unless absolutely essential to do so. So if people are commuting in on the trains, buses, tubes, all of that should be stopped as much as possible for office-based staff who have alternative work locations. If you go onto our website, dohr.co.uk, hit the coronavirus image that's in the middle of that homepage, and it will take you to a screen which has got all of our coronavirus information on it. There's a blog on there about working from home. It's written yesterday. It gives you some suggestions about things like exercise, communication, having the right desk, having the right lights, having the right mouse, keyboard, etc., and enabling people to work from home in the best way possible. So there is a blog about that. I'm not going to go into that detail today. Those people are still working. They are still on full pay. Where you have a situation that the employees become ill and are unable to work, even if they are at home, then they should be off on sick pay. So they may still, they may have gone and started working from home, but they're now sick and unable to work. They are now on sick pay rather than full pay. So those are the two different scenarios in terms of those people who are working from home. In terms of the people who can't work from home, there is no hard and fast rule. So different companies are doing different things, and generally that's based on the particular type of business that they're running. So again, in the statement yesterday, bars, pubs, clubs, theatres were all, they weren't told to close, but they were advised to, and people were advised not to make use of those facilities. What do you then do with the staff for those environments? So they should, if possible, still be on full pay, because you're preventing them from coming to work. Now, if your income is diminishing because you're not able to provide a service, that actually causes cash flow issues. So your alternatives then are to ask people to take annual leave, but you can't force them to unless your contract allows you to. You can look at layoffs, you can look at short-term layoffs, or you can look at short-term working. And in worst case scenarios, you may need to look at redundancies. Now, that will absolutely depend on the type of business that you have. Certainly, if you're providing care workers, or if you're, got staff in retail shops that need to continue to provide a service, then those aren't really going to help, because you're going to still need your staff to provide the service. You're still going to need them to come to work. So you're going to either need to enable them to come to work and to work safely, or shut your business down for an indefinite amount of time. If you're carrying on your business, let's take, I know that one of our clients is a printing shop, for example, where they have people coming into the shop, they've got a counter in the shop, and people are coming into the shop with their printing requirements. So in that sort of environment, wash hands on arrival, take off outer clothing on arrival at work, and have a separate area to put those. Not antibacterial, because that won't help. Proper sanitizer with a high alcohol content should be used frequently throughout the day, and every time that a customer leaves the shop, the counter should be wiped down and disinfected. It's not necessary for people to wear gloves as long as they're not shaking hands with people, and obviously keeping a safe distance from people when you're talking. Remember, your customers are going to be concerned too. And that's where the communication and marketing becomes really, really important, because the more you tell people what you're doing, the more confidence you give people in your processes, the more comfortable they will be, both as employees and as customers. So we're not saying that every business has to close. That's certainly not the advice at the moment. But we are saying you have to take all reasonable steps to protect your staff and your customers. So regular hand washing, regular disinfecting, and enabling people to keep a safe distance from customers is absolutely fundamental at this time. What happens if somebody refuses to come to work? Now, that's also a very different situation. So under normal circumstances, if somebody refuses to come to work, then they would normally be deemed to have resigned. So in this situation, if somebody is refusing to come to work, you need to understand why. If it is because a member of their household is ill and that they are showing flu-like symptoms, that person now needs to be isolated at home. The whole household needs to be isolated for 14 days. So they can quite legitimately refuse to come to work and can claim statutory sick pay without needing a fit note from the GP or anything else in writing. That will change. We are expecting NHS 111 to be issuing something, but they haven't specified what or the timescale in which they'll have that in place. The one thing that we're saying is keep really, really good, clear records of who is off when and the amount of time that they're off for, because at some point you're going to need that to reclaim sick pay from the government. So at the moment, if somebody's refusing to come into work because they have reason to believe that a member of their household has either got or has been in contact with somebody with coronavirus, then they are on work from home, they're isolated. If they can work from home, they're still on full pay. If they can't work from home and they're self-isolating, then they're on statutory sick pay. If you're processing your own payroll, you need to follow the government advice on the HMRC website that you would normally for processing your payroll. If you have an external organisation process payroll for you, speak to your payroll provider. The government haven't yet set up the facilities for claiming back that money, but the first people who will know about that will be the accountants and the payroll providers rather than us in HR. So you will be able to claim that money back, but we don't know what that mechanism is yet. So your record keeping has to be absolutely spot on. If somebody is refusing to come in to work but hasn't been in contact with somebody with coronavirus and isn't showing any symptoms, then you need to look at whether or not they're a high-risk person. So if perhaps they've had a heart condition, they're diabetic, they have got very severe asthma, if there are any underlying health reasons why they believe that they should be self-isolating and therefore not coming to work, then they are entitled to statutory sick pay, and then they are entitled to employment support allowance. And they're only entitled to statutory sick pay if they're earning above the weekly threshold, which is £118. Now, any figures that I give you today are current as at today, but they actually all change on the 6th of April. But as at today, if somebody is earning more than £118 per week, then they are entitled to claim statutory sick pay, which is currently just over £94. Both of those figures will go up in April, so do check with your payroll provider. So if somebody has an underlying health condition and they can work from home, they continue to be paid their normal salary. If they have an underlying health condition but can't work from home, then they need to go on to statutory sick pay or onto employment support allowance, depending on their contract. At the moment, you can only claim back the first 2 weeks of somebody's sick pay from the government. Now, I know they've said 14 days, but if somebody's a part-time employee and only works 3 days a week, then in effect, you'll be able to claim 3 days from week 1 and 3 days from week 2. So in that 14-day period, you can claim 6 days, so 2 weeks worth of that person's sick pay, you'll be able to claim back from the government. At the moment, I keep saying that, don't I? At the moment, then the rest of that sick pay has to be funded by the company. So what are the alternatives? They're not pretty, that's for sure. There is something called layoffs and short-term working. I have again, if you go to the website and you go to that resource that I talked about earlier, which is accessible off the dohr.co.uk homepage. On there, you will find a how-to guide. Now, if the owner has put that together, some of your contracts of employment may well have layoff and short-term working guidelines in them. But if they don't, then as at 11:15 today, Tuesday the 17th of March, you must consult with staff and get their agreement to anything that you do. However, we have seen and heard on the grapevine that that is likely to change. And even if you don't have those clauses in your contracts of employment, you are still likely to be able to instigate layoffs and short-term working. The how-to guide is your first port of call in there. I can't talk you through now the whole process that you need to follow. There are certain criteria that you need to follow, and there are something called guarantee payments. So again, as long as you're earning, and as long as the staff are earning enough money to be eligible for those payments, there are some payments. At the moment, it's £29 a day. From April, it's going up to £30 a day for each day that they would normally work. But there's a maximum amount of days that you can do that for in any 3-month period. So in effect, if we're seriously looking at a lockdown of 12 to 16 weeks, which is what we could be looking at, then the current legislation for layoffs and short-term working isn't going to apply. So again, it's making sure that you stay up to date with the movements, and we will do our absolute best to keep you up to date with the changes that the government are making. And that website that we've started to build is going to be where you find that information, and it will signpost you to the official government sites as well. We're ringing hot at the moment, phones and emails. There's lots and lots of people with inquiries. Can they make people redundant? They need to achieve cost savings to save the business. What's the situation? Where does the law stand? As we stand at the moment, the proper redundancy process must be followed. So you must have a meaningful consultation with your staff. However, the definition of meaningful consultation is a little bit flexible now, and we don't think that the tribunals are going to come down on people who don't do a month's consultation or don't do group consultations in the same way as they would need to do in normal circumstances. You can't just tell your staff that you're making them all redundant. You still have to look at who you've got, and you need to be really careful that you don't end up with a discrimination claim or a bullying claim or something like that. So if you decide that you need to achieve a certain amount of cost savings across your business, it could be that you need to make all of your staff redundant. Now, that probably means you're shutting down your business. However, it could be that you need to realise £5,000 worth of cost savings a month. If you just decide that you're going to make person A and person B redundant and leave everybody else, that's where your business is then at risk of an unfair dismissal claim or constructive dismissal claim. You need to look at the actual cost savings that you need to achieve. You need to look at how many people are doing specific jobs and how you fairly select people, either for redundancy or for reducing their hours. Now, people are going to want to hang on to their jobs, so they're going to be more flexible with you than they might have been in any other situation. So if you say to people, instead of working 7-hour days from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour for lunch, actually, I need this half of the workforce to work from 9 till 4, and this half of the workforce to work from 10 till 5. Every day. That saves you 5 hours per person per week. What's the cost of that saving? They're still getting their money, they're still getting income, which is going to be critical to people at this time. Excuse me, your business is still able to function, but you are on a short-term basis reducing the hours that they're working. Now, you can't just do it, you do need to consult. And this is again where that marketing piece is so important. People think about marketing as only being external, but actually internal communication is at this time even more important than your external communication. So if you're if you've got a situation where you need to make people redundant, sit them down, even if it's virtually using a Zoom platform or using some other, Microsoft Teams or anything like that, and have a conversation with them. Explain to them what you're trying to achieve as a business, how you are going to achieve it. It may be that you do need to lose 2 or 3 members of staff. Perhaps ask if there's any voluntary redundancies. But if you're going to make people redundant, you still need to serve notice. You still need to pay them for that notice or pay them in lieu of notice. And if they're eligible for redundancy payments, you still need to pay them redundancy payments. So making people redundant isn't necessarily a quick fix. At the moment, redundancy pay is £525 per week, or up to that if the employee isn't earning that amount of money. If you're not sure about how to do the redundancy calculations, please speak to us. There are different age criteria and different length of service criteria. So at the moment, purely on the weeks, it's £525. That is going up to £538. Thank you, Fiona. I knew that. £538 with effect from April. And you also need to look at how much notice somebody's got. So if somebody's got 12 weeks notice and it takes them over into April, then their redundancy pay potentially needs to be paid at that higher rate. So it's really important that whether you're looking at layoffs, whether you're looking at short-term working, or whether you're looking at redundancies, you understand that you can't just turn around to your staff and say, that's it guys, I'm shutting up shop, we're all gone, because there may be fallout to that. It may be that that's what you've got to do. I hope for all of your sakes that it's not. But if you follow a proper process, then you are less likely to get stuck at a later stage. So we've talked about working from home. We've talked about layoffs. We've talked about short-term working. We've talked about redundancies and consultation. The 14-day isolation is going to be challenging for people. But if people are clear after 14 days and you need them to come back to work and you're able to provide work for them, then we would encourage you to do so. I'm going to talk about recruitment. I know that seems like a really strange thing to be talking about at this time, but I'm just going to touch on it. So some of our clients are in the middle of recruitment processes. Some of our clients have made offers and have people waiting to start. This is going to be a really difficult time for those people because they're going to feel like they are in limbo. The main thing to remember is if you've issued a contract of employment and you have a confirmed start date, then that contract of employment comes into force unless you take action. So you need to think about the implications of that. You can't just ignore it. You can't just say, well, this person isn't here, I'm going to get all my staff to work from home and forget about that person who you've made a job offer to. You have to still include them in your communication and in any actions that you take. Now, it may be that you take a decision that that person can't start because the business can't sustain them, in which case you need to serve them with notice in the same way as you would if they were an employee. And depending on what's in your contract of employment, you may still need to pay them notice pay. So if it says that they have a week's notice in their probation period, if that's your clause, that they have 6-month probation and a week's notice in their probation period, if you're not going to take them on, you still need to pay them that week's pay. They're not entitled to redundancy pay. They haven't got 2 years service. If you have in your contract that they're not entitled to any notice within their first month of their probation period, then you won't have to pay them. You won't have to pay them that week's notice because contractually it's not there. Now that's the case at the moment. Fiona, have you got anything else to add on that? Or
I would just say, I mean, that is the case contractually, and you're right in that respect. But just to bear in mind that a lot of employees would have left one job to go and join another, and arguably you can still pursue a claim against a new employer even if you haven't actually started there. So what's been seen in the courts, case law has shown that it's more reasonable than not that even if there is no contractual entitlement for notice pay, that an individual gets at least a minimum to compensate them for sort of leaving their job and then having to find a new position potentially, or start at a later date. So what would be reasonable in those circumstances would potentially just only be 1 week, but that is something that you just need to consider, that they will be at a loss, and therefore it would be reasonable in those circumstances, whilst not contractual, to pay them at least a week's notice as compensation.
Thank you. Okay. So that's recruitment. I'm just going to stop there and breathe. The Q&A box is open and we have a chat panel there as well. Has anybody got any questions that they want to raise at this time? If so, just pop your questions into that Q&A and we can have a look at those questions. There's a lot of people on here, I know. We're not necessarily going to be able to get to everybody, but if you've got any questions, then please do pop them in that Q&A. Okay, I'm going to talk about training because that's something else that HR often touches on. So we're being told to socially distance as much as possible. But so face-to-face training courses should stop. Where possible and practical to do so, then training could be taken online. Certainly if you've got somebody who is a new employee and they need to be onboarded and you are bringing them on board, then the training that they get is absolutely fundamental. And being able to do it via a Zoom platform, by videos. There's a fantastic tool called Loom, Loom, that enables you to record videos that you can use for training staff. So if you've got some either existing staff or new staff or people that you're needing to multi-skill, then it's a really good idea to use online platforms or something like Loom that will enable you to get the training out there so that people are still getting the training that they need. If you've got staff working from home, online training is also something that you can give them to do while they're not necessarily able to do their normal day job. So sometimes there are instances where you're trying to reskill people, upskill people, give them better IT skills, anything like that. Then again, that time that people are working from home can be used to give them the training that they need. There's some fantastic online training available. LinkedIn has got an amazing training platform. Udemy is another training platform. There's a company called Micro. They do fantastic Microsoft skills training, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. I think they've also got Google Suite on there, a G Suite on there as well. So that's certainly something, rather than having people sat at home doing nothing, it is certainly something that you can do. It is using that time to upskill your staff. So training could be an alternative, at least something to get them to do. Contractors. So working through my list here. Contractors. So what do you do about contractors? Well, hopefully, if you're using freelancers, contractors, or external companies, then you've got terms of business in place between yourselves and them. And just like when you're relying on a contract of employment for your guidelines as to what you do for your employees, then actually you need to rely on your agreements, your legal agreements with your contractors for how you deal with them in the situation that you're in. Do not start treating them as if they are employees. They are not employees. As long as you know that they're not employees. Anything that you do that makes them look like an employee, i.e. giving them sick pay out of the generosity and goodness of your heart, could well come back and bite you on the bum later. You need to make sure that if someone is self-employed, that they are claiming the money available to them from the government and not from you. You are a client, and you need to make sure that you maintain that client service provider relationship. That's hard. That is absolutely hard. But it's really important to protect your business, because if somebody's been a contractor for you for 3 or 4 years, they could come back and try and claim that they were an employee for all that time. And if they decide to go to an employment tribunal and they're able to demonstrate that the working relationship was more of employer-employee, then they can then come back after you for things like sick pay and holiday pay and those sorts of things. So just because we're in crisis doesn't mean that you should suddenly change your approach to it doesn't that you change your approach to dealing with your contractors. Laying off contractors, so generally they're far easier to get rid of than your staff are to get rid of. Again, if it says that you'll give a month's notice, or if it says that you'll give a week's notice, then that's what you need to provide. So again, follow what you've got in those documents. But you are able to get rid of them more easily than you are employees. Somebody's asked me this morning whether you can keep contractors and get rid of employees. Okay, that's kind of a difficult situation, but it will come down to what those contractors are actually doing for you. So if they are providing business critical services that no one in your business can actually provide, then yes, you can keep them, even if you're getting rid of some employees. However, if they're providing additional resource and doing the same sort of thing as your employees are doing, or your employees can easily do the job that those contractors are doing, then actually the contractor should go over and above the employee if you're looking at a selection pool and how to save costs. So it will depend on your organisation, it will depend on the nature of those contractors, it will depend on the capacity, ability of your staff and the relationship between the two. But again, stick to what you've got in your associate agreement. And if you have to give a month's notice, give a month's notice. If you have to give written reasons, then give written reasons. Hopefully you don't. Most of the time, if there's somebody's freelancer or contractor, you can just stop using their services, but make sure you follow what's in the agreement, because otherwise they can come back at you as well. The one, what else am I talking about here? Right. Official advice, that's my next thing. Whatever you do, make sure that you are following official advice, not social media advice. Okay, so if you are in doubt, look at the government websites, look at NHS 111, look at the HMRC website. The links to all of those official sites are on that COVID page on our website. It will take you straight to them. Please, please, please don't rely on interpretation of that official advice, and certainly don't rely on social media. It's bad enough at the best of times trying to separate fact from fiction, and at the moment there is so much emotion around this whole situation that people are making assumptions. Assumptions are always dangerous. People are going with gut feel. People are going with what they think is right, even if it's not right. And just because your friends tell you something doesn't mean that they've got it right. So keep going back and checking what the official advice is, and recognize that just because something is correct today doesn't mean that it's correct tomorrow. Keep records. So for example, if somebody's off sick, keep your records. Make sure you know exactly which days they're off sick, what days you've paid them for, what the reasons for the sickness is, etc. Continuity of service is something else that I've written down here. If you are asking people to take annual leave, if you're asking them to take unpaid leave, if you're putting them onto short-term working, in all of those circumstances, people continue to accrue continuity of service, which may not sound like a big deal. But if, for example, somebody's got 1 year, 10 months worth of service at the moment, and then you ask them to take unpaid leave for 3 months because that's what the advice is, then they will click over from the 1 year, 10 months to the 2 years, that then gives them more rights. Now, at the moment it's 2 years. That may be something that the government reduces, we don't know. But at the moment it is 2 years. So once somebody's got 2 years, they can claim unfair dismissal, constructive dismissal, and they're entitled to redundancy pay. So those are just things that you need to think about, that they are still accruing continuity of service depending on how you deal with people within your business. I'm going to open up Fiona's mic for a minute because I've muted her while she's madly typing away answering questions. Thank you for that. Are any of the questions that I've been trying to ignore them, Fiona, just because I'm trying to talk. Any questions there where there's advice that's relevant for everybody?
They probably all are relevant to everyone. Not so much the maternity one, I suppose that's quite specific. But lots of general questions here. A very good one from Mark Jason. What happens if someone's working their notice without a new job to go to and now changes their mind?
Ooh. Go on.
So I've just replied in there that if somebody is working out their notice, there's no legally you're not entitled to actually continue to employ them. They're working their notice out. You may have made provision for their cover, you may have recruited somebody else. If you haven't and they want to continue in employment with you and you're happy for them to do so, then that's something that you can agree between the two of you. But if not, and your view is that you actually want them to leave and you're suffering hard times as everyone else is at the moment, then you're not obligated to keep them employed.
Okay, one of the things I would always say is that once somebody has resigned, then they've kind of already begun to check out. So if you do decide, not always, but sometimes, if you do decide that you're going to keep that person on, you just need to think about the long-term implications of doing so, because as soon as this situation changes, they may be off anyway. So you know your staff better than we do, but you just need to think about that particular aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
What else have you got there, Fiona?
So another one from Susan Nill. She's asked, can I clarify if our employment contract does not allow for layoffs short-term working, that if legislation changes, you do not need to consult with staff about layoff and short-term working? And I know you touched on this earlier about the possibility of the government changing the position at the moment, so that if you don't have a contractual right to lay somebody off or put them on short-term working, that this could change and that you will actually be able to enforce that in the future, possibly, and we have to wait and see what comes out. But if that does happen, it won't mean that the consultation provisions will not apply. You will still need to consult as you would in the usual way, even if you do have a contractual right to lay somebody off, because you can't just phone somebody up and say we're laying you off. You should always have a meeting with them. If that's not possible now, then as Donna said, a Zoom call or any other type of live video call, and consult with them in the usual way about when you're planning to do this, how long you anticipate it to be for, and anything else. So it's always recommended that consultation take place regardless.
Okay, while you're talking about those layoffs, can you just pick up on Graham's question there? So he runs a restaurant and basically they're closed. He needs to lay off staff, but he wants them back when the restaurant reopens. What are his options?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think a lot of people are going to feel the same way. And if you've got the right to lay people off in your contracts, then consult with them and lay them off for a period of time, with a view to them coming back at some point in the near future. We hope near future.
And do they get their guarantee payments in that situation?
So then in that situation, they'll get their guarantee payments. They're not great from an employee's perspective, because at the moment they're £29 a day for 5 days in any 3-month period. That's rising to £30 a day from April, but it's still not great from an employee's perspective. But on the other hand, many employees would view the fact that they're still in employment, albeit not really receiving much remuneration, as better than not being employed at all, and that they would have their job back at some point in the near future, rather than having to start again and search for another position.
Okay.
If you don't have that right in your contract, then consult with your staff about whether they'd be prepared to be laid off or put on short-time working for a period of time. In this instance, Graham, you would have to lay them off. If they agree and they would rather that than be made redundant, then go down that route.
Okay, and just to pick up on Alex's question, which he's put in the chat window, what approach would you recommend if someone refuses short-term working? They've kind of got a choice. They either accept short-term working and temporary layoffs, or you make them redundant and they have no job to come back to. So they don't necessarily get to dictate to you. You've got 2 or 3 options available to you. If they're refusing short-term working, are they going to work for free, or potentially you need to make them redundant because the business can't afford that to continue to pay them? We'll just take one more. I'm going to mark, I don't know how, I'm going to dismiss Graham's question because we've done it. There we go. I'm sorry, it's a little bit of using the technology here. Lisa Greenwood, another short-term layoff question. Do you have to apply the same conditions of making a redundancy in terms of assessing the staff that are put into this process? For example, if you have 5 employees at a similar level, but only work to cover 2 employees?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I would just ensure that you apply a fair procedure in selecting who you're going to lay off and who you're not, because you don't want to have a discrimination claim against you. If you've laid somebody off, why? Was it because that you laid off the older workforce rather than the younger, or those who have been off sick for whatever reason? And so you need to be very careful if you're going to select a couple of people over others, why you have selected them, and a similar selection pool to that you would use in a redundancy situation may be appropriate in this situation.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, I'm going to put Fiona back on mute for the minute, let her keep answering some of those questions, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of other issues for the moment. So the first one is payroll and finance. As I've already said, sick pay, the government have at the moment allowed employers to claim up to 2 weeks of sick pay per eligible employee. What they don't have in place at the moment is the mechanism for enabling employers to do that. So that will be coming, and it will probably be the way in which SSP used to work, which means that you in effect offset it against national insurance and PAYE payments that you would normally make to HMRC. So there would be some kind of declaration where you say, I'm claiming X many days for this employee, and the money that you owe them and that they owe you is then offset against one another. That's where I think that that's going to go. The other thing from a finance point of view, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of days, but in the budget, it was announced, Rishi announced that the business continuity loan scheme is going to be available to businesses to enable them to carry on functioning. Now that is a loan, and it is through a central government pot of money rather than through the local banks at the moment. But there is information about that available on the government website. Again, if you follow those links, there's a link on our website which says government advice for businesses. And if you follow that through, you can get to that information from the budget. But a business continuity loan may be one of the ways in which you look to continue to fund your business in the next couple of months, especially if you've got no money coming in, potentially no savings in the business, and you're going to have to pay redundancy money to people. So that may be a way of giving you some liquidity just to get you through the next few weeks. Insurance. So insurance is a really, really interesting one. The way in which the government have currently worded their announcements means that it is advice and not legal requirement. So the advice to us as individuals is not to go to the pubs, the theatres, the restaurants and the clubs. If the government had turned around and said, we are shutting down clubs, restaurants, theatres and pubs, then those businesses would possibly be able to claim on their company insurance. But the challenge that they have now at the moment, and some of you will know this far better than I do, is that because the government have advised us as individuals not to go and not to attend mass gatherings and not to travel and not to go to big venues, rather than shutting all of those things down, a lot of insurance policies are not kicking in. And that's causing huge issues for businesses. Don't assume that just because the business next door isn't covered for X, Y, and Z, that you're not covered. Every single insurance policy is written differently, A, because of the type of business, and B, because of who it's underwritten by. This is a really, really important time to speak to your insurance broker and make sure that you absolutely understand the wording of your insurance policies to find out what you're covered for, what you're not covered for. Your insurance broker has a huge role to play in educating you as to what you could and should be doing in terms of bringing some more cash flow into your business. Have you got a business continuity insurance policy? When does it kick in? Under what circumstances? Okay, so those are really important things to look at. The other thing which is really important to look at is what is insured away from the workplace. So if you are getting laptops, phones, maybe a printer, maybe a chair for your staff to enable them to work from home, what is actually insured by your insurance company away from the workplace? If somebody were to drop their work laptop at home, are they insured? If somebody was to have a break-in at home and the laptop was stolen, are you insured? The other thing to look at, and you need to speak to your IT people about this, is security on those laptops. Are they encrypted? Okay, so again, if they're outside of the workplace where security, may be A, if they're now in people's homes and security is B, are those laptops, are those company personal effects actually insured? And if they're not, you need to be getting them insured. Again, that's a conversation for your insurance broker, and it should be part of your business continuity plan and your business risk assessment. If you haven't done a business risk assessment, it's a really, really worthwhile exercise doing. I've put, again, on our website, which can be accessed at dohr.co.uk, hit the coronavirus button, that would take you to the resource page. There is a risk assessment, company risk assessment sheet on there. It's worth getting as many people as possible involved in doing that risk assessment rather than just the business owner, because you'll get everybody's views and people will think about different things. Get all the risks down, then look at how you mitigate them. But insurance is definitely one of those risks. While I'm on that resource page, there's also a home worker risk assessment there, which you can download for free. If you've got anybody that is working from home, get them to fill in that risk assessment and return it to you as soon as possible. You've still got a duty of care towards all of your staff, even if they're not physically sat in your offices. So make sure you know where they are, what they're doing, and making sure that they can work properly and effectively from their work location. Right, I'm going to shut up in a minute and open up for questions. Hopefully that's going to work, but we'll see. The thing to remember here is that we are in a very, very fast moving, ever changing situation. The advice that the government gave out last Thursday is completely different to the advice that was given out yesterday. And I suspect it's going to be very different to the advice that we see coming out each of the rest of the days this week. I suspect that by the end of this week, I don't know for sure, this is just me, Donna Obsfeld, HR advisor, I suspect that schools are going to be closed by the end of this week. I know that more teachers are having to self-isolate, either because they themselves are ill or because family members are ill. A lot of the schools are putting provisions in place for online learning. That is going to put you as employers under pressure because your staff are then potentially having to look after children as well. So you need to be very practical. You might want to change the hours in which people work. There are lots of things that you're going to need to think of, but if somebody can't work because they are now looking after children, even though those children aren't ill, then you are going to need to look at agreeing unpaid leave or unpaid parental leave with them. So parents do have a right to unpaid parental leave for up to 4 weeks per year per child. That's outside of anything that's happening with coronavirus. But if a parent is not ill and the child is not ill, they're not eligible for sick pay, they're not told to self-isolate, but the parent needs to stay home to look after the child, then potentially they can request 4 weeks of unpaid leave per child per year. If you need any more information on that, then pick up the phone or drop us a question and we can answer that. Make sure that everything and anything you do is not putting yourself in breach of your own contract of employment. Every single company is different. Your staff are all individuals, and believe me, they're all individuals with their own personalities and their own quirks. Okay, make sure that anything that you do is A, legal, and B, compliance with your own policies and procedures, because if it's not, you're opening yourself up to a claim before we even get started with anything else. The world around us is changing. Communication is going to be absolutely essential. I may well run another one of these webinars. There certainly seems to be very high demand for it. So again, thank you. I'm going to ask any more questions to pop them in the Q&A box, and I'm going to just open up Fiona's mic. Have you got anything else to add? Any other words of wisdom?
No, I think you've covered off most things. Unless anyone's got any specific questions that haven't been touched upon today, then, I mean, we're always here.
See, there is a way of participants raising your hand. You should have a facility. You should have a facility to raise your hand if you've got a question that you want to verbalise, and I can then unblock your mic. I can't see that on my panel, but it may be that it's because I'm presenter mode. Rebecca says, unpaid parental leave, is there any right to paid parental leave if the child is sick? Short answer is no. Parental leave is unpaid. There is emergency time off to arrange for care of dependents. That is also unpaid. That doesn't just apply to children, but that applies to the elderly as well. But it's not actually for you to give the caring, it's for you to arrange the caring. Now, under normal circumstances, that would be fine. Current circumstances, that is going to be far harder. A lot of the time, grandparents are the secondary caregivers, and with the over 70s being told to socially distance, and many of them to self-isolate, people are going to be short of help looking after children, and it may be that families need to join together so that mum can work one day, dad can work a next, or that you know, auntie works one day and the second auntie works the next day, and you have all the cousins running riot in the house. We're going to have to be flexible. There's going to be a lot of changes coming down the line, but at the moment, no, there is no right to paid parental leave, unless there's something I can't think of. But
no, unless of course you have an additional contractual right to it, which some companies may offer.
yes,
But ordinarily, if there's nothing in your contract, then it's unpaid, or your handbook, of course, if that's contractual too.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I think we have done a 55 minutes. It's not bad. I thought we were going to overrun. But if there are no other questions, I'm going to call it a day there. As I said, I will try and get this webinar video up as quickly as possible. It'll be accessible through our YouTube channel. But also I'll put a link to it on the COVID resources page so that you can access it. Thank you very, very much. I promise I'll stay in touch. If there's any big significant changes, we'll get those out to people as quickly as we possibly can. We will send them out on our normal email. We have our Infusionsoft, which is the way in which we send out our weekly HR Bite sites. But we will get information live on the website and out via HR Bite size as quickly as we can once anything changes. Stay safe out there, and good luck with your businesses. Take care. Bye.